Welcome to an Ideas Have Consequences cigar chat. Really, this is our first cigar chat, and we call it a cigar chat because, well, we have a cigar. And this particular episode, it is sponsored by Founders Cigars Company. Their website is founderscigarsco.com, and if you go there and you use code Larry, you'll get 20% off. And I'm a fan of cigars. I don't smoke a ton of them. I never smoked cigarettes. I've never smoked weed. Not that they're comparable. One is mind altering, one isn't. But several years ago, I was on a dove hunt with a friend of mine, and this is in 2019. And at the end of the hunt, we're all a bunch of guys, we're sitting around, and the fellow who is taking us all hunting, he started handing out cigars, and I said, I won't like it. I've never smoked anything. I take my health, pretty seriously. He said, no, you'll like this. Trust me. And he was right, and and I did. And the thing that interests me, the thing I kind of like about cigars, is there's a culture to cigars, kind of like there is, say, with coffee or with winemaking. I wouldn't say that I'm a hardcore coffee drinker, and I'm not a wine drinker, but I like the culture of both, and it's because I'm fascinated with people who take a craft like that very seriously. And being in Havana, Cuba, a couple of years ago, going to several of the famous cigar manufacturers and watching how they made them, and the care with which they made them. I really, really enjoyed it. It just fascinated me. And, cigarette smokers, they have to have one, every few minutes. It's the sort of thing they might do while they're riding in the car, or, when they're mowing the lawn. Cigars aren't really like that. Cigars are the kind of thing that have a little bit more of a culture to them, and that you enjoy, say, in a moment like this, when you're having, a very good, conversation. I always feel kind of privileged when I'm sitting with a friend and they light a cigar, because it means they're settling into a conversation for a little bit. So anyway, Founder Cigars Company, founderscigarsco.com, and this one is the Hamilton Candela. Very nice cigar. I would light it, except we're in the house, and the reason we're in the house is because it's very hot outside, and I wanted the air conditioning, so I won't actually light this one in here. Now today we're going to talk about any number of things that you might have questions regarding during this live event. And so you'll be able to submit your questions to me. Jonathan, who is behind the camera, he will make me aware of what those questions are. But let me start with a couple of things that might interest you. The first of which is that I have an article that is out today in the Federalist about a conversation that I had over coffee with the very famous novelist, the elderly novelist. He's, excuse me, he's 85 years old now, Frederick Forsyth. Now, some of you may be too young to know who Forsyth is. Forsyth was arguably the inventor of the thriller, the international thriller genre of novel writing. He is most famous for a book that became, in fact, at least 4 of his books have been made into major motion pictures. The Day of the Jackal was the first. It was his first novel, and it was a blockbuster. Became a major motion picture. You can watch it on, Amazon Prime or Netflix or something. It's very good. You'll enjoy it. It's still, my wife and I watched it a couple of nights ago, and it's still, it wears well. All these years later, it's still so very good. The Odessa File, the Fourth Protocol, The Dogs of War, all excellent novels. But here's the interesting thing. I have never really understood celebrity culture. I'm not the kind of guy that you name the famous person, if, Kim Kardashian or Dustin Hoffman were across the room in a restaurant, I would have no inclination, no interest in going and having a picture with them, or, or, getting an autograph. I don't think I've ever asked for an autograph at any point in my life. Or doing a selfie. That just isn't me. It's not who I am. But I did want to meet Frederick Forsyth, and it's because a few years ago, when I was mowing on my ranch, and we're talking about maybe 10, 15 acres, that I was mowing about every 10 days, I would download novels and listen to them, because it's important that you, from time to time, do something that's unrelated to your work. And it's very hard for me to do things that aren't related to my work. I'm the kind of guy who tends to work an awful lot, that when I'm not working, I'm still working in my head. I'm still thinking about issues. And I thought, my wife had told me, you really need to think on something else. You need to read something. So I would go and pick up a book on, some heavy issue, and she'd say, no, not some nonfiction thing. You need to go and read, something that's fiction, some good fiction, and enjoy that. And so I decided I would read some Frederick Forsyth. So I downloaded on Audible his book, The Fourth Protocol, which was a movie in the 1980s, the late 1980s, with Frederick Forsyth, with Michael Caine and with Pierce Brosnan. It was a mediocre movie. They took a lot of the really good stuff out of it. Anyway, so I'm listening to it, and you get into these chapters on Marxism, on how Marxists take over a society, how they penetrate the culture through what might be called the long march through the institutions. And Forsyth had really done his homework on this. I mean, for a novel, what he was saying was quite factual. And he was explaining in detail the way this is done. And again, the novel was published in 1984. So here I am, I download it, I'm listening to it, and I find myself stopping on my tractor, shutting off the engine, and listening to these passages and thinking, you know what, I need to order a hard copy of the book so that I can look at these passages more carefully. So I did. And guess what? These passages were missing. So I ordered another copy of the book. And again, those passages were missing. So I ordered a first printing, and those passages were in there. And somehow the Audible had used the very first edition of the book. But all subsequent editions had removed these passages. And not only had they removed them, they had rewritten them. So here I am with multiple copies of the Fourth Protocol, and I have Lori follow along in say a second printing or a third printing of the book while I'm reading the original aloud. And she's saying not only those passages not there, but they're changed. I mean, like factual details are different. So I thought, wow, I'd really love to meet Frederick Forsyth. I'd love to be able to ask him if he did these edits or if he knows anything about these edits. And when Lawrence Fox was here, actor Lawrence Fox, my friend, a guy with whom I will be doing a show. We're going to be launching a show here soon called WTF, The World of Taunton and Fox, which I think you will enjoy. That's going to be coming up. But he was here with me. I dawned on me, his uncle played the jackal in the movie The Day of the Jackal. And I thought, if anybody can get me a meeting with Frederick Forsyth, Lawrence probably can. And so Lawrence, texted his dad, James Fox, also a very famed actor. And after a couple of, text messages and emails and phone calls, I'm on my way to meet Frederick Forsyth at his home just outside of London. And I tell that story, the story of what brought me to him, of my coffee conversation with him, which was only about a week, 10 days ago that I actually met with him. It was quite fascinating. In an article that is in the Federalist today. You'll find it on the homepage there, where Forsyth said, "I've been Bowdlerized," a reference to Thomas Bowdler, who was a 19th century editor, I guess you could say. He was a physician, but he he issued an edited version of Shakespeare, removing all of the scandalous passages from Shakespeare, called The Family Shakespeare. It was very, very famous edition because it was criticized so heavily for what he did to Shakespeare. And all subsequent, editors who did these types of things, removing scandalous passages, is called Bowdlerizing, after Thomas Bowdler. So here I am telling Frederick Forsyth, or asking him, did you know anything about these edits to your books? And he said, to your book. And he said, no, I didn't know that. And so I started explaining it to him. He was fascinated, and he exclaimed, I've been Bowdlerized. So that was really interesting. You can find that article in the Federalist today, but it's an important issue. I'm using Forsyth to discuss a very important issue, which has to do with modern editing. And I don't mean just in the sense of a professional edit, proofreading of an article or a book, but rather we're moving back towards Nazi-esque book burning. That's where we're going. The left is already doing this electronically. They're tanking books. One of my own book, which came out in 2020, which was to be distributed by Simon & Schuster, they tanked it. They didn't want the book distributed. I hear they had given me an advance to write the book. I wrote the book, my publisher, Post Hill Press, but then, on the back side of that, by the time the book was ready to be published, here we are in the 2020 election, and they didn't want to see the book published. They didn't want the book to get out. I mean, we're seeing this kind of thing more and more frequently. And when you do your little updates on your phone, sometimes buried within them are edits to your ebooks, to your Amazon books, to your Apple books, Kindle, this type of thing. They go in and they change them. Now, often this is just being done for typographical errors, but it's not the only reason that it's being done. So I'm going to ask Jonathan to come and start submitting some of your questions to me so that I can know what it is that is on your mind. Jonathan, do you got any prepared for me?
I do. One of the first questions is, how is this not illegal?
Doing these kind of edits?
Correct. How is it not illegal?
That's an interesting question because you would think that it would be illegal. However, as I point out in the article, and I'll actually look here to see if I can find it, because the language is very specific in your agreement with, say, Amazon. Oftentimes people just say they agree to terms and conditions without actually ever reading the terms and conditions. Buried in your terms and conditions, if you use an Amazon Kindle, is this: Amazon and its affiliates reserve the right to refuse service, terminate accounts. They've done that, where you've paid for a book on your Kindle, but they have the right to actually keep your money and terminate your account, removing all the books from your phone. I actually don't do updates to my phone or to my laptop. Amazon and its affiliates reserve the right to refuse service, terminate accounts, remove or edit content, or cancel orders at their sole discretion. So you are actually agreeing to give them the legal right to do these things to your books, and they do it. Now, a question I would have, and had I more time and opportunity with Forsyth, it would require him probably going and and finding his own book contract. But what I find kind of amazing about this, these rewrites being done, edits are one thing, rewrites are a whole different deal, because by the time the Fourth Protocol was published in 1984, Frederick Forsyth was already a very famous writer, a famous novelist, and he would have had quite a lot of leverage at the negotiating table. I'm sure he got a massive advance and this kind of thing because they would have wanted his book. And as such, I find it hard to believe that he would have given them the legal right in his contract. Now, maybe he had bad lawyers, I don't know, but it seems highly unlikely that he would have given them the legal right to make any edits to his books to which he didn't approve. I'm a much lesser, author than Frederick Forsyth. I've never had his kind of leverage because I haven't sold as many books as Frederick Forsyth. So, but I, as a writer, in my own contracts with, say, HarperCollins or Post Hill Press, I've written 3 books. I never gave them the right to publish anything that was different from what I'd written, and that's because my name goes on the, on the cover, and it goes on the spine of the book, and as such, I have to answer for it. So I don't want to answer for something that I didn't write, something I didn't say. I have a feeling that's what has happened with Kristi Noem, that Kristi Noem let someone else write the book about her, and she's not even really familiar with what is in the book, and then she's going around on the talk show circuit trying to defend books that she didn't write. I think this happens in the industry a lot more than you would realize. There are some authors, some Christian authors that I know that are not writing their own books. They have other people who are writing them. They do light edits to them and this kind of stuff, but they're not that familiar with their own books and with their own content. That happens. That is not true in the case of my own books. It's not true in the case of Frederick Forsyth, I'm sure. So it's odd to me that these edits would be done that he wouldn't know anything about. Now, one could say, well, he's 85 years old and he's probably just forgotten. I did not get the impression that he had forgotten. I didn't get the impression that he didn't, that he just simply didn't remember. I don't know of any author who would give, a real author, a real writer, who would give that kind of power over to the publisher, who would surrender that to them. But again, it isn't just simply that they changed elements of it. They changed it quite significantly, factual details even. Now, typically what this looks like is, let's say, and I don't know that this has been done with Huck Finn or Tom Sawyer or Uncle Tom's Cabin or whatever. But typically what this looks like is some modern day Bowdlerizer has decided that they don't like passages in Huck Finn because they think it's racist. And so they edit it and they reach into your books and they remove those passages. Now, interestingly enough, I was chatting with Forsyth's son, just very briefly, about this, and he goes, well, I understand why they might do some edits like that. Well, no, I don't. That isn't for some, ministry of truth to decide what is and isn't racist or isn't wrong for you to read. That's up for you to decide. You're free to read racist literature. You're free to read the Bible. You're free to read, excellent literature. You're free to read bad literature. You're free to read whatever. And then you decide whether you think it's good or not. But it isn't up to someone else to do that. I don't want them touching my books. And by the way, what this is called is it's called Digital Rights Management, DRM. And I included a link in the article. I say I did. I maybe it hasn't been included. But Digital Rights Management, you can go on YouTube and you can find instructions on how to remove Amazon's ability or Apple's ability or whoever, their ability to go in and change your books. But I highly recommend just getting hard copies of any book that you value, because they're going to start burning them all. Next question.
I got a great question from Linda Kern. She wants to know, is there any way to safeguard or get alerts when they try to do this to your Kindle or to your iPhone? Is there a program set up to alert you?
There's not one to alert you. You would have to read the updates. The updates before you do them. Now, you can turn on automatic updates. I don't. I never have automatic updates on. But then yeah, it'll say something like bug fixes, let's say, but then you can hit more or details, and it will tell you specifically what all is being changed in there and read it. Sometimes they just have sort of an et cetera sort of thing where they don't actually give you the real details. What you can do, though, is just go into your settings and shut off updates. I just, as a rule, don't do them. And I'm giving serious consideration getting rid of a smartphone, actually, and just going back to I don't know what you want to call it, a dumb phone, just an old flip phone or something to that effect, because they're harvesting your data. And I don't know if you've seen this, but Elon Musk, just a few days ago, was going after Apple, saying that Apple is selling your data to, I think it's Chat GPT, is selling it to AI. And as he put it, they're selling you downriver. And if they do this, he says that they will, their products will not be permitted on any of Elon Musk's platforms. They just simply won't permit them. And the reason is because it's not only a loss of privacy, but it's their ability to pirate almost anything that you connect to. So that's highly problematic. Next.
We got some great questions here. J.D. Thompson asks, do you usually get to pick your own editor, or does a publisher do that for you?
I'm sorry, do you usually get what from the editor?
To pick your own editor, or does the publisher do that
the publisher, you don't get to choose your own editor. I mean, you might choose your own editor once you've been there for a while with a publisher. A relationship with a publisher is, with an editor is kind of a tight relationship. Editing is a gift. Editors don't get nearly as much credit as do the authors, but there are a few gifted editors. And they're the kind of people, they're kind of like coaches in a sense, that an editor's job is to get your book written. And a good editor knows what an author needs, whether they need a deadline or the absence of a deadline. Some people do not perform well under deadlines. My friend John Lennox, for instance, a deadline will just crush him. He doesn't do well with that. An editor knows how to move you along, whether it's words of encouragement or threats. I mean, they know how to push you along, but they also know how to not impose their own personality on their writing. Bad editors do this all the time. They try to make your work theirs rather than trying to bring out your best. I think of it like a director, with an actor, trying to bring out an actor's, best. A good editor knows how to do this. And once you've been with a publisher long enough, you can say, hey, I want to make sure I get so-and-so again. I want to work with her. She did a good job for me. My first two books were with the same editor, an editor that I really liked. He may even be watching, Joel Miller. I thought Joel Miller was a great editor, and I really enjoyed working with Joel, but Joel moved on to greener pastures. Next question.
You got some great questions here about the
Okay.
Bible. You had one person ask, will they start doing this to the Bible? And then you had another person respond that said they're already doing it. What's your opinion on doing that to the Bible? I mean, that's taking things to a different level.
Yeah, the person who said they're already doing it to the Bible is correct. This is chiefly done not through translations, but through paraphrases of the Bible. Things like the Message, for instance. Doesn't mean that in some instances paraphrases aren't meant to be, aren't well intentioned. In some cases they are, but I would avoid paraphrases. And by the way, some of you decided that the KJV, I must have said on a previous podcast that I was using the ESV or the NIV, and there were several of you who said that the KJV is the translation. The KJV is not the translation. The KJV is not a very good translation, and I know that will be jarring for some of you, and it's important that you understand this. The KJV translate. It's a beautiful translation and historically deeply important translation. But the translators of the King James Version of the Bible, so-called because in 1604, King James of England decided that he needed to authorize a new translation of the Bible, and that is because the 1560 Geneva translation of the Bible he found to be very detrimental, and that was it's called the Geneva translation because it was done in Geneva. It's fairly Calvinistic. Calvin's Geneva. It was heavily influenced by guys like John Knox, for instance. And the Geneva Bible, very famous Bible, a widely used Bible in the 16th and 17th centuries, but King James didn't like it. And the reason he didn't like it is because of the words that it used. It used words like, say, elder instead of bishop. And he's famously quoted for saying, no bishops, no king. So the Geneva translation of the Bible was fairly Republican. I don't mean that in the sense of the Republican Party. I mean a Republican form of government, a fairly Presbyterian form of government. Our government, American government, is based on a Presbyterian form of church governance, not a Catholic form, which is much more like a monarchy. And that was what King James wanted. He said, whoa, 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 this translation is dangerous because it might lead to my own overthrow. So he wanted a new one, and he wanted a new one that used some of the old terminology, like bishops, for instance. And so that was the King James Version of the Bible. And it was, commissioned in 1604, finished in 1611. And the King James Version of the Bible is incredibly important, not only because it's arguably the greatest work of English literature and influenced the development of the English language in an era when a lot of people, poorer people, didn't have access to a book. They often had the Bible, or at least could hear the Bible. And the King James Version of the Bible, the way it was translated is you had companies, as they were called, of translators. Some who took, let's say, the minor prophets, some who took the poetry of the Bible, some who took the law or the Pentateuch, some who took the wisdom literature, others who took the Gospels, the epistles. So these various companies of translators worked diligently to translate from the manuscripts that they had. And what they primarily had was what we call the received text, or the textus receptus, if you want to sound very educated and use the Latin term. But the translators themselves knew that their translation wasn't fully accurate, and they said so in their own introduction to the King James Version, which is worth reading. It's the introduction itself. They say, hey, there are some words that we don't know their meaning, and it's because we do not have access to enough extra biblical literature to find its meaning elsewhere. So we have idioms that are used, for instance, in Hebrew that we don't know what they mean. And unfortunately, we just kind of have to grasp at straws to try to figure it out. We now have, as one biblical scholar put it, an embarrassing riches of biblical manuscripts, going back much further than the Textus Receptus, where we can see that there were minor errors that entered into the received text. So we can clean up those errors. And that's very, very important. And, so we now have things like, for instance, the NAS, the ESV. These are fairly hyper-accurate translations. But there's some of you who are saying, hey, the NIV isn't a word-for-word translation. You don't want a word-for-word translation. And it is because Hebrew, for example, has a very limited vocabulary, a very small vocabulary, actually, the ancient Hebrew, versus, say, English. And when you are, when you're trying to translate literally, and maybe that's not even quite the right word to use, when you're trying to translate word for word or do what we might call a transliteration, you often end up with gobbledygook because it doesn't make sense when you translate it into the English. So, for instance, in the Hebrew, and I'm just drawing on memory here, but it says God separated between the light and between the day. That doesn't make sense in English, you see, that when you're going word for word. So you translate often what is referred to as thought for thought translation. The point is you're trying to get a literal meaning from another language. But if you know another language, you know that often literally translating it, you end up with something very different than what is actually meant in the original language. So this is very important to understand this. It's also important to understand that the Bible has to be updated frequently because the words themselves change meaning, unfortunately. For instance, a word like gay, half a century ago or more, it was not a reference to homosexuality. So you'd have to be careful in using a word like that today. I'm feeling very gay. Well, people now would assume that you mean you're celebrating Gay Pride Month. So the language, with the language changing, any language, the English language is dynamic. It's constantly changing. So translations have to be changing with it in order to make sure that we preserve meaning, that we communicate what Scripture actually says. So again, I'm not a fan of paraphrases. I don't think paraphrases are good. I don't like them. I don't think you should use them. I think it's important to understand the original meaning. And NIV can be very useful in getting the big picture. But then if I'm really studying, I would go to something like the ESV. The NIV reads more smoothly. I think that maybe the modern NIVs, they've made them gender neutral, which I don't like. The ESV hasn't, the ESV hasn't done that. But I'm just using that by way of an explanation. I often find that the King James only crowd, they're often very militant. Oddly, it's weird. Like you'll see some church, way out in the country that has King James only, on their signs, which is kind of odd because King James was pushing a fairly Catholic biblical, interpretation. It's a beautiful translation. There's no question about that. And the ESV can feel a little stilted. For instance, if I'm going to read from the pulpit, say Psalm 23, I don't want to read that from the ESV. The ESV doesn't preserve the beauty of that. I would read it from something like the New King James version of the Bible, which is much more beautiful, or even the NIV. But anyway, it's important to understand this about translations. We could do a whole show on translations in which I could explain to you in more detail how some of these things kind of work. But it's an interesting topic. Next question.
All right,
By the way,
another question.
just so you know, Jesus did not speak English. So if you're of the King James only view, you need to understand Jesus didn't speak that language. He did not speak it. And I'm not a you fill in the blank only translation guy. I think there are several very good translations. The ASV, the American Standard Version, is also a very good one. But now it would read a little more stilted because the language has changed a little bit since that translation was done. Next question.
All right, we're going to do one more Bible question, and then we've got some others. But Elise Ralston, she said, is the New International Version of the Bible the One World Government Bible? I've been reading that since 1990, and I've recently discovered entire verses that are missing.
One World Government Bible?
Yeah, that's what she said.
I've never heard of the One World Government Bible. So, next question.
Okay. All right. You've got Eve of the West has asked you a couple of questions about. One is they call you Bond, by the way. Bond, looking healthy, my friend. Do you have your editor looking at your works to see if this has happened to you?
No, but I would know if it was happening to me because I read the manuscripts, before it's published. So I would know that, and certainly family and friends read. I don't know that I've actually taken down one of my books once it was actually published in hardback and read it, because by the time it's published, obviously I wrote it, and I've been through editing it so many times that you're just sick of it. You're just ready to see it published and go out there. But someone like my wife, for instance, she would go and read it, and she would know. She would pick up on those things. So no, I haven't had that happen to me, and maybe I haven't had that happen to me because, my writing was not as influential as that as Frederick Forsyth. But the interesting thing about Forsyth is here he is, he's a novelist. So who cares what he's saying, right? I mean, it's not true. I mean, it's a novel. It's fiction. But here's what Forsyth said to me, and if you read the article in the Federalist, it gives you a lot more detail. His opinion on John le Carré, which fascinated me, was kind of playful. The question as to whether or not John le Carré was actually a spy himself. There's some who think that he was a traitor, that he was a double agent. I don't know what to think in regards to these things, but I have heard it alleged. And but Forsyth, when I revealed this to him, and he exclaimed, "I've been bowdlerized," he thought for a moment and he said this. He said, if you think about my previous blockbuster books, The Day of the Jackal, Dogs of War, and the Odessa File, he says, all of those books are history, not real history. They're fictional history. He says, but you're looking back on scenarios where I'm telling you a story of something that might have happened. An attempt on Charles de Gaulle's life in The Day of the Jackal, hunting down a Nazi war criminal in the Odessa File, mercenaries overthrowing an African government in the Dogs of War. He said, but the fourth protocol need not be read as history. He says it's more of a what-if scenario. What if Marxists penetrated the government from within and radicalized a political party, say the Labor Party or the Democrat Party, and then began radicalizing and weaponizing government institutions against the people? What if? And of course, that's exactly what's happened to the Labor Party in Britain and to the Democrat Party in the United States. They've been radicalized, massively radicalized. So Forsyth's point was to say, it makes sense that someone might have deemed those books dangerous because I'm giving a roadmap in those books for the overthrow of government. Now, interestingly, he initially thought, when I told him, that the parts that had been edited were on the making of an atomic bomb, because in the fourth protocol, part of the central premise, thesis of the novel is that the Soviets, via various means, that they bring into the country bits and pieces of an atomic bomb, and then they assemble the bomb in Britain and are planning to detonate it next to an American base. The purpose of doing so was to make it look like the United States had had an accidental detonation of a bomb, and that it would lead to the British public a massive outcry that America be forced to withdraw from Britain, withdraw all of their forces from Britain. And Forsyth thought, well, I guess the details on how to build an atomic bomb was deemed to be too dangerous. And I said, no. Those aren't the parts they took out of your book. It's the bits on Marxism, on a Marxist takeover that they took out. And that to me is fascinating. You'll want to read this article. It is it's on the homepage of the Federalist now. I don't know how far down you have to scroll, but it is titled something like How Novelist Frederick Forsyth was Bowdlerized. Next question.
Okay, Eve of the West has a follow-up question. Are you working on a fiction book? You mentioned it sometime.
I am
And,
working on a novel of my own, and it's interesting because I've published 3 nonfiction books and 1 million articles, but it could be argued that this is actually my first book because I started this book more than 20 years ago, and I always would set it aside and move on with something else. And it just so happened I was working on this novel and then began work on what became The Grace Effect. And the aforementioned Joel Miller, my editor at HarperCollins, for The Grace Effect, I told him I had this novel. And he goes, no, you don't want to write a novel. You want to write The Grace Effect. You want to write, some nonfiction books. He says, you don't want to do that because you don't want your first book to be a novel. Well, he would later admit to me that he only said that because if I started writing the novel, he said, I would lose you as one of my writers because you would then go over to the fiction side of HarperCollins where there are different editors. You'll be working with somebody else. He said, so I convinced you that wasn't what you wanted to do because I wanted to keep you as my writer. I've been revisiting that novel now, the manuscript, and I feel like it has a lot of potential. My wife feels like it could be my most important book. And it's because it's written to entertain, but it's also written to educate. It's written to, I'm trying to smuggle in a warning into the novel. And it's maybe good that I haven't finished it yet because there's so much going on in the world right now that I want to incorporate into the novel. But I've had fun writing it. Like Forsyth is a little bit of a model for me because Forsyth, Forsyth researched his novels very, very thoroughly. Now, there are those writers who don't do that. They're writers of fiction who don't do that, and there's no reason that they should have to do that if they don't want to. But I want, for instance, anyone who has ever been in, let's say, Oxford, England, or in Nuremberg, Germany, or in North Africa to read my novel and go, this guy has been in these places because I've been in those places and I know what they're like, and they're just like what he's describing here. That's the way I want it to read. I want if I have a scene of construction work, and I do, I want any construction worker to read that and go, this is the way you build that. That's the way it's done. So I have experts who vet various parts of my book to make sure that it's right. I have a hit on a character in the novel where he's murdered in such a way as to make it look like a suicide or an accident. So I had a physician friend read through that and say, did I get it right? In his initial read through, he says, no, that wouldn't work. And then he explained to me how I needed to change it, and I did. So I'm trying to get all those kind of details right, but hopefully it will one day see the light of day, and hopefully people will read it and it'll do some good. Next question.
Okay, you got a question here from Jan Weaver, or it's more of a statement actually, Larry. And she says, it would be awesome if you did a book club, hint, hint.
Well, we've actually talked about doing that, and we probably will do that. There's a lot of changes that are coming. Just to let the posse know, there are some real opportunities that will be coming. There will be, sort of a membership-based aspect to Ideas Have Consequences that will be coming. Nothing heavy, but like what you would do with, say, an Amazon or a Netflix subscription that'll get you, a different level of access and opportunities. And we'll help fund what we do. You know, this is, you can't see it here, but there are cameras sitting here that are $30,000, $40,000, lighting, all kinds of stuff that are doing. Jonathan back there is doing his work. We have right now simultaneously watching in Dallas a team that's doing their part here. This stuff is expensive to do, and to do it at a high level. And we want to give you more content, not less. So we're taking a look at that. Also about to launch, just to let the posse know, a new show. It will be a show separate from this. There's Ideas Have Consequences, but then you will have a show that I'm about to start with Lawrence Fox that will be titled WTF. And just in case you think that's a reference to a dirty word, it means the world of Taunton and Fox. And that should be fun. We're looking forward to doing that. You can watch right now. We just uploaded yesterday or the day before an interview that I did with Lawrence Fox on his show. He has another show called Fox and Father. And I did an interview with him in London last week. And so we just uploaded that show to there. So I can give you a little flavor of what's coming. Next question.
Okay, our next question is from Diane Linscomb. And she says, as one Christian to another, do you believe that it is God's will for everyone to be healed?
No. For everyone to be healed?
Correct. And she said, I don't believe so, but my daughter believes in tongues.
Well, I'm not sure what tongues have to do with healing, but no, clearly not. We live in a fallen world. Jesus was crucified. That was his will, that be the case. Jesus would go for a walk. I think it's John 20, John 21, goes for a walk with John and tells him that, essentially tells him he's going to be crucified. And Isaiah was put into a hollow log and cut in half. I myself have suffered extraordinary trauma, physical wounds. And so no, I think there are those people who think that if they have enough faith and they pray enough that God will heal them of whatever it is that is ailing them. Paul had his famed thorn in the flesh, and the Lord didn't remove it from him, telling him, his grace would be sufficient for him. There will be a time, Revelation tells us, I think it's Revelation 4, tells us there will be a time where there will be no more tears, no more death, sorrow will be no more. But in this life, unfortunately, we do deal with those things. And sometimes the Lord does those things in order to get our attention, sometimes in order to get the attention of others, but always for a purpose. I like what Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who knew a thing or two about suffering, said. He said, the meaning of earthly existence lies not as we have grown used to thinking, that is, in prospering, but in the development of the soul. God is chiefly concerned about the development of your soul. He's not chiefly concerned with your comfort. And unfortunately, Christians in the West, particularly in the United States, have become very Epicurean. Now, a big difference between the Epicureans were philosophers. They were Roman era, classical era, I should say, philosophers. And people often confuse the Epicureans with, say, hedonists. They're not the same thing. Hedonists are about pleasure. They're about pleasure seeking, doing anything. We often associate them with things like, sexual orgies and, drunken, parties. That's hedonism. The Epicureans were a philosophical sect that were about the avoidance of pain. That's a different thing. Not about pleasure seeking, but about avoiding pain, living a comfortable life. And I think that this is what the American church has become. This is what the American dream has become. It's about seeking a comfortable life. Nothing wrong with having a comfortable life, seeking peace in your life. Paul even says, that it's living a peaceful life is is a good thing. But when those things become your God, it is a problem. And I say it's a problem now because there's so much evil taking place in our own country that a lot of Christians aren't willing. No one's asking them to sacrifice their life at this point or to risk their life at this point, just to risk some degree of comfort. And most of them aren't willing to do that. They're afraid that somebody's going to say something negative about them on social media. That alone is enough to prevent them from liking something. Musk has made likes invisible to all but yourself and the person whose tweet you're liking, because they know at Twitter there are a lot of people out there who would like something that they don't like for fear that other people will see it and go, hey, I saw that you liked that post about that pro-life post. How dare you? And maybe lose a job or something. If more people were willing to risk their comforts and speak out against the mutilation of children, for instance, we'd have a lot less mutilated children. If more people were willing to burn rubber on these desecrations, these gay rainbows that are being put all over the place, we'd have a lot less of the gay rainbows. Next question.
We have one question here, and they want to follow up on the Bible being censored, and they mentioned that CCP is going to rewrite their versions of the Bible. How can people get a hold of a copy that is original?
Like, are they asking what's the best translation?
I guess what's the best translation? They weren't
These are
specific.
nice cigars, by the way. And again, founderscigarco.com. Use code Larry. You get 20% off of everything at checkout. Make sure you do that. founderscigarco.com. By the way, these guys are vets. They're vets and they're American. They're American. Cigars are made in Dominican Republic, but the company is an American company. Anyway, there are several very good translations, as I mentioned before. As just a daily read, you can find a good ESV. You can find an NIV, an NAS, New American Standard Bible, an ASV, which is an older version. Those are all very good translations that you can use and are effective. And you listen. Just walk into any Christian bookstore and you will find a wall of Bibles. But you need to understand there's a difference between, let's say, the Soldier's Bible, which isn't a translation, or the Women's Study Bible, or the Geneva Study Bible, or something like that, and something like the King James Version. One is a translation. The others are often just notes that have been added to emphasize a particular thing in a given translation. You need to see what translation that is. I've seen, for instance, something called the Soldier's Bible. I've never looked at it, but that's not a translation. What they've done is they've been given the rights to a particular translation. I don't know which one they use. And then presumably what they've done is they've added notes that are meant to emphasize the role of, say, soldiers and to be of an encouragement to somebody who's in that profession. There's nothing wrong with that. A women's study Bible, unless it's feminist, might be one that just sort of emphasizes in the notes. It highlights, as it were, things related to women's issues. But it's not a translation. It's just notes, you see, that have been added. So you have things like the Ryrie Study Bible and very famously, things like the Schofield Bible, which are dispensationalist in their emphasis, and their notes are that way. Well, you see the Geneva Bible, the one that King James didn't like, it had notes. And those notes were very anti-monarchy, and that's what alarmed him. He was like, oh my heavens, the most popular Protestant translation of the Bible that's out there is the Geneva Bible, and it has these notes in there that could lead to my overthrow. So we need a new one. Hence the reason he authorized the King James version of the Bible. Next question.
Our next
Cigar
question
smells
is
good,
a
by the way.
Question. You have great guests on the show, and some people want to know how you choose your guests.
How do I choose my guests? Sometimes they're people I know. Sometimes they're people that have been suggested to me. Sometimes they're people who have requested to be a guest on the show. I think listen, Ideas Have Consequences isn't a guest-driven show. It's driven by ideas, our discussion of ideas. But occasionally there are guests that I think could be very interesting. And it's worth noting that there are some guests that you don't know, that maybe you've never heard of, but whose content is so interesting that I want to have that person on the show. So for instance, take somebody like Robert Epstein. I think our very next show that will be released on Tuesday is my interview with Dr. Robert Epstein. Robert Epstein doesn't have his own show. He's well known with a certain, subset of people, but not with others. Maybe there are a lot of you who have never heard of him. Tucker Carlson has done an interview with him. I think maybe Megyn Kelly has done an interview with him. He was attacked by Hillary Clinton, and he fascinates me. Robert, in addition to being a friend of mine, Robert is a lifelong Democrat. He voted for the Clintons. He can hardly be called a Trumper. He's not a MAGA guy. But this is a guy who is, he's a Harvard researcher who became very alarmed by the fact that he noticed that Democrats were rigging the elections. They were rigging the outcome of the elections, and he's proved it. He's proved it. And he's showing how big tech plays a major role in this. So I got to know him. I heard him in D.C. He was giving a lecture at a big gala that I was attending. I was fascinated, made a point of getting to know him, and have talked with him on many occasions. And we text back and forth a little bit. But Robert is a fascinating guy. Now, you may go, well, I don't know who he is. Well, you will after you watch the interview on Tuesday, because you're going to be fascinated by what he has to say about the way that big tech is playing a role. You need to know these things. You need to know what's happening. You need to know how they're doing it. And not only in elections, but how they're altering facts through what he calls ephemeral experiences. So you will find this very interesting. Next question.
No more questions posted
okay.
right now.
Well, let me say a couple of things here. First of all, is I had said that I was going to explain a little bit about Marxism and fascism, and I'll save some of this for a show that we're gonna record, in which I'll go into more detail. But I see a lot of people who are saying we're seeing the elevation, we're seeing the rise of a new Marxism. I actually think that what we're seeing is the rise of is more fascist than it is Marxist. And I would call it a fascio-Marxism. It's sort of a strange blend of the two. But in spite of what is alleged about fascism, that fascism is somehow an expression of the extreme right, is an expression of the extreme left. Both Marxism and fascism arise from the left, and they're regarded as ideological enemies, but they're bastard twin philosophies that both aspire to absolute power, and hence the reason that fascists and Marxists hate each other. It isn't because they're so different. They're actually quite a lot alike, but it is because they both aspire to absolute power. So in that sense, they are ideological enemies. But fascism, the reason I say that, that what we're seeing is mostly fascist is because Bill Gates, for instance, is a capitalist. To call him a Marxist, it makes no sense to say that he is a Marxist. He's not a Marxist. He is a fascist. And what we're seeing out of the World Economic Forum, they aren't Marxists. Oh, some of them might be, but not the wealthy ones. You can't be, by definition, a wealthy Marxist. I mean, Marxists are all about the proletarians, the real ones. They're all about the proletarians, the working class, sharing equally of wealth and this sort of thing. That's never been achieved. It never will be achieved. But this, at least on paper, is what they're about. That isn't what we're seeing. What we are seeing is the rise of an elitist class of individuals who are using ESG and DEI, which are fascist tools, to weaponize industry against the people. And this is another element of why it's fascist and not Marxist. Marxism, by definition, is about the rising up of the lower proletarian populist crowds seeking to overthrow their rulers. We aren't seeing that. What we are seeing is the populist uprisings that are taking place all across the Western world, in Europe, in South America, in North America. What we are seeing is populists themselves are seeking freedom. Populism is just a grassroots movement. It's just ordinary people who are seeking freedom. They want their lives back. They want their freedom back. They don't want their economies tanked. They don't want their borders wide open. They want to preserve their cultures. They're patriots, and they don't want to be called fascists because they're patriots. That's what populism is. That's what we're seeing in the populist uprising. There's nothing Marxist about the populist uprisings we're seeing. It may very well be that the would-be overlords want to create a kind of Marxist society at the lower levels, but not where they live. That's not what they want. What they're interested in is power and in weaponizing industry, big tech, all of it against you. That is to say, weaponizing capitalism or some form of capitalism. Real capitalism is about free markets, and that's not what they want. They want to weaponize wealth, harness its power, and use it against you so that you will be, disbarred, as it were, from participation in the economy, from participation in society, unless you do what they say. And that may be a bird flu vaccine that they say you have to take. It may mean that you have to submit to a digital ID, something to that effect. And in order for us to be effective resisting these people, we need to do it en masse. We need to do it in the hundreds of thousands, millions of people who say, no, I won't tolerate this and I won't submit to this. And I won't tolerate leaders who are of this persuasion. So anyway, I just want to clarify, hopefully I did, maybe I just muddied, maybe I just muddied the water a little bit, but I want to clarify that what we're seeing is really more fascism. And while I want to make a distinction also between fascism and Nazism, because while all Nazis are fascists, not all fascists are Nazis. Nazis are fascists, but who are, by definition, anti-Semitic. So I've been making that distinction for years now. We're seeing the rise of fascism, not Nazism. But I think we're now starting to see the rise of full-on Nazism again, because with the war that is taking place in the Middle East, you are seeing the rise of a new anti-Semitism. And interestingly enough, almost all of those people are tied to the radical left and are fascists. And now I would say, if you add to that the anti-Semitic element, they're Nazis. So that's what we're seeing. These are words that are tossed around far too much in our society, and it's because the left does that because they want to destroy any actual meaning. But while they would call Trump a fascist or a Nazi, I promise you, they're the fascists, they're the Nazis. That's what we're seeing. Are there any more questions?
There are no more questions.
Okay, well, I want to encourage you to go and read that article that is on the Federalist website today. I think it's thefederalist.com. You will find my article on Frederick, Forsyth there. I want to encourage you, support our sponsors. These are people who are getting behind a show like this and saying, we want programming like this, and we need you to support them. Make it worth their time to support shows like this. FoundersCigars.com. Go and find them. Use code Larry. You get 20% off at checkout. You have to do that at checkout. These are very good cigars. I have appreciated. They've sent me several. I've shared them with my friends as we sit on my deck, and they have enjoyed them all. There's different ones with different wraps, different fillers, and thus different flavors. I've chosen the Hamilton Candela, which I'm going to smoke outside here shortly, as the one for today. But they've got other ones, some that are smoother. I personally like a smooth, a milder cigar, and then they have some that are strong. My brother-in-law, he likes a really fuerte. He likes a very strong cigar, a darker cigar. That isn't typically the one that I gravitate to. But by all means, go and check them out. They're worth supporting. Thank you so much. Look for. I want the posse to be. Please help us get the word out about this podcast, about this show, that we're being suppressed. There's no question about that. You just look at our numbers and you can see that they're putting their foot on our throat. It's interesting. Lawrence Fox, he said to me, every time I tweet you, he says, my own Twitter goes, and he says, for several hours or maybe a few days, I have very little visibility. You know, he called me and he said, you're dangerous. He said, because if I tag you on a tweet or I retweet you, it affects my own account where I have very little visibility. So here's a guy, he's got 500,000 followers. He tweeted out my article today and he has 50 likes on it. I mean, how do you explain that? That's weird, right? So that's what's happening. So the way you have to get around that is by word of mouth. It's by you people sharing the podcast with other people, telling them about it, sharing articles with them. I need the posse. I need you guys to get the word out about this show, to promote it. I'm here to make a difference. Do I want to make a living? Well, of course I do. But I was doing this long before I was paid to do it, because I believe in what I'm doing. I believe the things that I'm saying on this show. This, for me, is my mission. It is my calling, my God-given calling, to equip you to engage the culture and to change the culture. And the way we do that is we do it one at a time. This has been the Cigar Chat with me, Larry Alex Taunton, on Ideas Have Consequences. Thanks for joining me.